At 12:17 that night, I opened my eyes just long enough to see my younger sister standing beside my IV. Jenna froze when she realized I was awake. The room was dark except for the green glow of the monitor and a blade of hallway light cutting beneath the door. My head felt packed with wet cotton. I could hear the faint mechanical click of the pump beside me, but I couldn't make sense of the small object in Jenna's hand before she lowered it out of sight. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Your line looked weird." Her answer came too fast. "Go back to sleep, Elise." I did. 2 hours later, alarms were sounding around my bed, and half the floor seemed to be running into my room. I remember a nurse gripping my shoulder, a doctor saying my name over and over, and Jenna standing in the hallway as my vision narrowed until there was nothing left. When I woke the next morning, I heard my sister talking to our mother just outside my door. She didn't ask if I was going to live. She asked, "Did they say what happens to the trust?" My grandmother had left me $160,000, and for years my family had treated that money the same way they treated my time, my career, and my savings, as something that would eventually be used to rescue Jenna. What my sister didn't know was that 6 weeks earlier, after one demand too many, I had quietly changed one thing, and once I started checking dates, messages, hospital records, and the numbers Jenna had been hiding, I realized that what happened beside my IV wasn't the beginning of our family's betrayal. It was simply the first time their entitlement had become impossible for me to excuse. The first thing I became fully aware of was the dryness in my mouth. The second was the blood pressure cuff tightening around my arm. The third was Mom's voice. "You were barely awake, sweetheart." I opened my eyes. Morning had washed all the color out of the room. White walls, pale sheets, plastic chair, stainless steel IV pole. Carol sat beside the bed in a powder blue cardigan, holding a paper coffee cup between both hands. At 65, she still managed to look put together in places where everyone else looked wrecked. When Dad died 8 years earlier, she had changed her blouse before the funeral director arrived because the first one looked slept in. That morning, not one strand of her hair seemed out of place. I swallowed against the sandpaper in my throat. "Where's Jenna?" Mom's fingers tightened around the cup. "Downstairs." "Why?" "She needed air." I turned my head toward the door. "Why isn't she in here?" "Elise." Mom leaned closer. "Before you start putting pieces together, you need to remember that you were heavily medicated." The sentence landed oddly. Not because it was impossible. Because I hadn't told her what I remembered. I stared at her. "What did I say?" Her eyebrows pulled together. "What?" "You said before I start putting pieces together." "What did I say?" "You woke up earlier. Sort of. You were confused." "I don't remember waking up." "Exactly." She gave me a small, patient smile. "Jenna said you were barely conscious most of the night." "There it was," Jenna said. "Not a doctor. Not a nurse. Jenna." A woman in navy scrubs stepped into the room carrying a tablet. "Good morning, Miss Harper. I'm Dana, one of the nurse managers on this unit. How are you feeling?" Like someone filled my veins with cement. Her expression softened, but only briefly. "You had a significant change in your condition overnight. Your physicians are reviewing the clinical timeline and medication record." Mom sat straighter. "What kind of review?" "Patient safety is involved." The paper cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "Patient safety." "Yes." "Is that normal?" "It can be when something unexpected happens." I watched Mom's face. She looked down. Dana continued. "Security is assisting with documentation as well." "Security?" Mom repeated. The nurse manager remained calm. "They may want to speak with Miss Harper once she's feeling stronger." Mom nodded. "Of course." But she set her coffee on the windowsill and never touched it again. Dana asked me where I was, what day it was, why I had been admitted, whether I was dizzy, whether I could feel my fingers and toes. I answered everything. When she turned to leave, I said, "Was my sister in this room around midnight?" Mom answered first. "Elise." I kept my eyes on Dana. "My sister, was she here?" The nurse manager paused. "Your sister was listed as your overnight visitor. Staff notes and access information are being reviewed." So she was here. She had authorized visitor access. Mom jumped in. "See? Nobody knows anything yet. I looked at her. I didn't say they did. You're looking at me like I did something. I didn't say that either. She pressed her lips together. Behind my eyes, the night returned in broken pieces. Hallway light. Jenna's shoulder. Her hand near the IV. Your line looked weird. Then, hours later, her voice outside my door. Did they say what happens to the trust? Where's my phone? I asked. Mom frowned. In your bag. Please give it to me. You need to rest. Mom, your hands are shaking. I know. You can do whatever you're trying to do later. I held her gaze. No. Something passed over her face. Not anger. Recognition. I'd seen that expression 6 weeks earlier, when I had told Jenna I wasn't giving her $30,000. Mom reached into my bag and handed me the phone. My thumb missed the passcode once. Then I opened notes. What are you doing? She asked. Writing down what I remember. Elise. I typed slowly. Around 12:17. Woke up. Jenna beside IV. Small object in right hand. Could not identify. Asked what she was doing. She said line looked weird. Later rapid response. Heard Jenna ask Mom what happens to trust. You can do this when you're clearer, Mom said. I am clear enough. You think I'd tell you what to remember? I looked up. You already started. Her mouth opened. Closed. I added one more line. Requested Jenna removed as visitor. Mom saw it. What does that mean? It means I don't want her in this room. Her chair scraped against the floor. Elise, she's your sister. I know. You don't even know what happened. I know I don't want her standing next to my IV again. Her eyes filled almost instantly. The guilt came right behind them. That was how our family worked. Jenna created the emergency. Mom carried the emotion. I paid the bill. Sometimes with money. Sometimes with silence. Sometimes with years. I pressed save. 6 weeks earlier, Jenna had asked me for $30,000 over roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Mom had chosen the meal because it was one of the few dinners all three of us ate without arguing when Dad was alive. I should have known nostalgia was being used as packaging. I had barely sat down when Jenna said, I need help. Not hello. Not how was work. Help? I put down my fork. How much? Mom gave me a look. Can we eat first? Jenna stared at her plate. 30. 30 what? Her jaw tightened. 1,000. I leaned back. Mom immediately said, Don't make that face. What face? That work face. Apparently I had a contract compliance face. What's the 30,000 for? I asked. My warehouse. What about it? If I can't stabilize things this month, I might lose it. Stabilize what? Cash flow. That isn't a number. Jenna shoved her plate away. I knew you'd do this. Ask questions? Interrogate me. Mom said. She is your sister, Elise, not one of your vendors. Then answering should be easier than a vendor. Jenna laughed once. You know why nobody comes to you unless they have to? The sentence found the softest part of me. I ignored it. What are your outstanding obligations? I'm handling them. Then why do you need my $30,000? Because handling things costs money. How long does $30,000 keep the warehouse? I don't know. Then it isn't a solution. Her eyes flashed. Not everyone gets to plan every second of their life like you do. I almost said some of us plan because we're the ones everyone calls after you don't. Instead, I asked, Can you show me your last 3 months of revenue and what you owe in the next 60 days? Mom put down her fork. Oh, for God's sake. What? You have savings. I didn't answer. You have Grandma's trust. The room went quiet. Jenna looked at me. Not Mom. Me. The trust isn't business capital, I said. Mom gave a humorless laugh. $160,000 is sitting there, while your sister is drowning. It isn't sitting there. You know what I mean? No, I don't think I do. That stopped her. She had expected me to resist. She hadn't expected me to make her define the assumption. Elise, you're 40. You have a good salary. You contribute to retirement. You don't have children. Jenna's eyes dropped. Mom continued. What exactly are you saving all of it for? I wish I'd felt anger. Instead, shame tightened around my chest. That was how deeply I'd absorbed their rules. My mother had asked why my own future deserved my own money, and I felt embarrassed that I couldn't produce a more deserving emergency than Jenna. I looked at my sister. How much do you owe altogether? She stood. Forget it. Jenna. No, Mom. She wants me to perform for it. I want to know whether 30,000 solves the problem. It keeps me from losing everything I built. That still isn't an answer. She grabbed her purse. Mom looked at me. You could make this easier. I've made things easier for Jenna for 10 years. And now you're keeping score. There it was. The old reflex rose behind my teeth. I'm sorry. Sorry I asked. Sorry I noticed. Sorry, my limits made everyone uncomfortable. I swallowed it. I'm not giving Jenna $30,000. My sister laughed. Wow. Then, she looked at Mom. There she is. The selfish sister. The cold daughter. The woman I became whenever I stopped being useful. Jenna walked out. Mom stayed at the table. You'll regret how you handled that. What should I have done? Helped her. And when 30,000 runs out? Mom looked away. That was the first time I understood something I should have seen years earlier. There was no plan after my help. My help was the plan. After Dad died, my usefulness had become permanent. I handled the funeral home, insurance, outstanding medical bills, veterans' paperwork. Jenna couldn't cope with the funeral director because grief made her physically sick. Owen carried boxes and drove relatives. At the reception, Aunt Marlene hugged Jenna. Your father always worried about you because you feel everything so deeply. Then she turned to me. Thank God Carol has you. You can handle anything. I smiled. For years, I wore that sentence like a medal. I didn't understand it was also a job description. 3 years later, Jenna fell behind on rent after leaving a marketing job she hated. She called me crying. I covered the shortage. 2 weeks later, she posted photos from a lake weekend. When I asked Mom whether she knew, she said, she needed something happy. With money I just gave her? Do you want her to submit a budget every time she experiences joy? By the end of the call, I was apologizing. Not for the money, for asking. Then there was the leadership opportunity I withdrew from 2 years before the hospital. Better pay, more travel, a real path upward. That same week, Mom had a health scare. Jenna's company was opening a larger warehouse. Owen was out of town. Nobody told me to turn the opportunity down. They didn't need to. Mom said, this is such a terrible time for you to become unavailable. Jenna said, I can't cancel the expansion. Owen said, do whatever feels right. I withdrew. Mom recovered. Jenna opened her warehouse. Nobody mentioned the job again. Not even me. 6 weeks before I woke up in that hospital bed, I sat across from the trustee who administered Grandma's trust. He placed the current paperwork between us. You understand this changes only the remainder designation. Yes. It doesn't affect your present beneficial interest. I understand. I looked at Jenna's name. For years, it had seemed natural. I wasn't married. I had no children. She was my little sister. If something happened to me, of course I had wanted her protected. But somewhere along the way, protection had turned into expectation. I picked up the pen. I'm certain. The new remainder beneficiary was a scholarship fund in Grandma's name, intended to help women returning to school after postponing their education. Grandma had gone back to college in her 40s. I had always admired that. The trustee asked, paper confirmation or electronic? Both. He smiled. Compliance Abbott. Version control. At the time, changing the designation didn't feel dramatic. It felt like correcting a document that no longer reflected what I wanted. I never imagined Jenna standing beside an IV. I simply knew I didn't want my death converted into a bailout plan. Back in the hospital, that decision suddenly felt enormous. Jenna had asked what happened to the trust before asking what happened to me. And she didn't know the answer was no longer her. By the second afternoon, I could sit up without the room tilting. A doctor came in with Dana. Mom was beside me again. The doctor explained that the review had identified evidence consistent with exposure to a prescription medication that wasn't part of my treatment orders. Mom went still. Are you saying someone gave it to her? I'm saying it wasn't documented as part of her treatment. How the exposure occurred is still being reviewed. Could she have taken something before coming in? That possibility, along with others, will be evaluated. Mom nodded quickly. What happens now? The review continues. Security is involved. Miss Harper may be asked for additional information. After they left, Mom asked, "Do they know exactly how it happened?" "Not yet." Her shoulders lowered slightly. "I noticed. I didn't label it relief. That would have been interpretation. At work, I had learned the difference between what happened and what I thought it meant." "What?" Mom asked. "Nothing." She watched me for a moment. Then she said, "Please don't accuse Jenna before they know." "I haven't. You removed her from the room." I protected myself. "She's devastated." I looked at the Ivy line. "So am I." Mom's lips tightened. "This isn't who you are." "What isn't?" "Treating your sister like an enemy." I stared at her. "No. Maybe this is just the first time you're seeing who I am when I'm not trying to keep everyone comfortable." She stood. "I can't talk to you when you're like this." "Okay." That answer surprised both of us. She picked up her purse and walked out. I didn't call her back. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Owen, before you talk to Mom again, ask her what she showed Jenna last spring." I read it twice. Then once more. The room suddenly felt colder. I typed, "What did she show her?" The reply took almost a full minute. "Grandma's old trust binder." Then another message appeared. "Elise, I should have told you months ago." Owen's message stayed on my screen until the letters blurred. "Grandma's old trust binder. I should have told you months ago." For a few seconds, I didn't type anything. My first impulse was the one I'd been trained into since childhood. Call Mom first, hear her explanation, make sure there wasn't some harmless version that would keep everyone from breaking apart. I put the phone face down instead. Then I texted Owen, "Come to the hospital, alone. Bring whatever you have." His reply came immediately. "Okay." That single word unsettled me, more than an excuse would have. While I waited, I opened the email Jenna had sent after asking me for $30,000. At the time, I'd reviewed only enough to decide I wasn't funding her business. Now I went back through every attachment she had voluntarily sent me. The first was a rough cash flow sheet. The second listed warehouse costs and vendor balances. The third contained several customer refunds. Dates that had seemed unimportant 6 weeks earlier suddenly stood out. Some obligations Jenna had described as future problems were already overdue when she sat across from me at Mom's dining table. $30,000 would not have fixed the company. It wouldn't even have fixed the month. I enlarged one attachment and felt a slow pressure build behind my ribs. Several customers were waiting for money back. One had already sent more than one written demand. Jenna hadn't been trying to preserve a thriving business through a temporary rough patch. She had been trying to stop several failures from becoming visible at the same time. That distinction mattered. Not because it excused anything. Because desperation made more sense when I could see what she was desperate about. A knock sounded at the door. Dana stepped in. "Do you have a minute?" I closed the laptop. "Sure." She checked the monitor before speaking. "The clinical review is continuing. I want to be careful about what I tell you because there are things we still don't know." "Okay." "The findings are consistent with exposure to a prescription medication that wasn't part of your ordered treatment." My fingers tightened on the blanket. "Do you know how it got into me?" "Not yet." "So you know it shouldn't have been there?" "Yes." The answer was quiet, certain. For the first time, something outside my own memory confirmed that the night hadn't simply been my frightened brain arranging shadows into a story. Dana continued. "Security and outside investigators are coordinating. Someone may come back to speak with you." "Has Jenna been questioned?" "I can't speak to another person's involvement." That was fair. I nodded. After she left, I reopened Jenna's documents. One line on the customer refund sheet suddenly looked different. It wasn't evidence of what happened beside my IV. It was evidence that my sister's need for money had become more urgent than she'd admitted. A few minutes later, Mom called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then, it rang again. The third time, she left a voicemail. "Elise, call me before you talk to Owen, please. There are things he doesn't understand." I didn't call. That was my first decision of the day. And it changed more than I expected. For once, Mom would not get to prepare me for someone else's version before I heard it. Owen arrived a little after noon. He came in carrying a paper bag from the cafe downstairs and stopped when he saw the laptop open beside me. You look better. I look less dead. His face tightened. Right. Sit down. He placed the bag on the windowsill. I brought you a muffin. I can't eat that yet. I know. I panicked at the register. Under any other circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I held out my hand. Your phone. Owen took the chair. Elise, before I show you anything, I need to explain. No. He looked at me. You can explain after I see it. His jaw moved as if he wanted to argue. Then he unlocked his phone. He scrolled through his photos and handed it over. The image showed Mom's dining table. I recognized the faded mark near the corner where Dad had once set down a hot pan without a trivet. A laptop sat open on the table. The spreadsheet on the screen was crude, more like a working note than a formal business record. Warehouse, vendors, customer refunds, business credit, personal cards, other obligations. At the bottom was a total, $160,000. I stared at it. The number was so exact that for a second I forgot to breathe. When was this taken? Owen pointed near the top of the screen. The photo should have the date. I opened the information panel. 3 weeks before my hospitalization. Whose laptop? Yenna's. Did you see her make the sheet? No. Then don't tell me she made it unless you know. He nodded. Mom called me over. She said the totals weren't adding up and asked me to check them. Jenna's laptop was already open on the table. Why did you photograph it? So I could add everything separately on my phone without touching her file. I zoomed in. The categories matched the documents Jenna had sent me, only the amounts were larger. Much larger. You saw the total. Yes, and you knew my trust was worth about that. Yes. What did you ask? Owen rubbed the back of his neck. I asked Mom why Jenna was building a plan around $160,000. My pulse ticked harder. What did she say? She said Jenna hoped you'd change your mind. About the $30,000? I assumed that's what she meant. Did you believe her? He looked at the floor. I wanted to. There was no defense in his voice. That made the answer worse. I gave him the phone back. What did Mom show Jenna last spring? He didn't move. Owen. He swallowed. Grandma's old estate binder. Why? I don't know why they had it out. Were you there? I came over because Mom couldn't get the printer to connect. The binder was on the table. And Jenna? She was there. What exactly did you see? He shut his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Jenna was holding the beneficiary summary. Something inside me went very still. Not broken. Still. What did Mom say? Elise. What did she say? He looked straight at me. Mom said, if anything ever happens to Elise, at least you'll finally be okay. The hospital room seemed to shrink. I heard the air vent above the window, the squeak of a cart outside, a voice calling for someone at the nurse's station. Everything ordinary continued while one sentence rearranged years of my life. Did Jenna answer? I don't remember exactly. Then don't guess. I won't. What do you remember? Owen stared at his hands. She didn't look surprised. I nodded once. That was an observation. Nothing more. Why didn't you tell me? His shoulders dropped. I told myself Mom was just being Mom. What does that mean? You know. No, say it. He looked uncomfortable. Good. I was tired of being the only person made uncomfortable by the truth. Owen said, she says things to make Jenna feel safe. With my death? I didn't think of it that way then. But you thought it was wrong. Yes. And you stayed out of it. His eyes met mine. Yes. I felt anger rise, but underneath it was something colder. Recognition. Owen had spent years calling himself neutral because neutrality allowed him to avoid the cost of choosing. When Mom pressured me for money, he stayed out of it. When Jenna took advantage, he stayed out of it. When I carried Dad's paperwork while everyone else grieved, he praised me for being good at it. He hadn't designed the system. He had simply learned how to live comfortably inside it. You knew it felt wrong, I said. Yes. You knew Jenna was planning around money that wasn't hers. I knew she was planning around your money. I didn't understand how far it had gone. You didn't want to understand. His face folded. No. He leaned forward. I should have told you. I should have said something the second I saw that sheet. Stop. He froze. I am not going to make you feel better about what you didn't do. His eyes reddened. I left my hands in my lap. For most of my life, another person's shame had functioned like a summons. I comforted, reassured, explained, reduced their responsibility until they could breathe again. Not this time. Owen nodded slowly. Okay. Send me the original photo. Don't edit it. Don't crop it. I will. And if anyone asks you what happened, tell them only what you actually saw. I understand. Do you? Yes. He sent the file while sitting beside me. I saved it into the folder I'd made the night before. Source documents do not alter. Then I asked, does Mom know you still have this? No. Don't call her and warn her. His expression tightened. I wasn't going to. You usually call her after talking to me. He couldn't deny it. I won't. That was the first useful thing he had done that didn't require me to manage him afterward. Later that afternoon, an investigator came to take a more complete statement. She sat in the same chair Mom had used. That detail bothered me at first. Then I realized a chair was just a chair. People didn't own spaces merely because they'd occupied them first. The investigator asked me to tell the story from the beginning, so I did. I said I had been drowsy. I said I woke and saw Jenna beside my IV. I described the small object in her hand as small, because that was all I knew. I did not call it a syringe. I did not call it medication. I did not turn uncertainty into drama. What did your sister say? The investigator asked. Your line looked weird. Go back to sleep. What happened next? I went back to sleep. Later, my condition deteriorated. Did you see her touch the IV? I saw her standing beside it, with her hand near it. I can't say exactly what she did before I woke. The investigator wrote. Did she know about the trust? Yes. How? I now know my mother showed her an old beneficiary summary. How do you know that? My brother told me he was present and saw Jenna holding it. He also told me what my mother said. You should ask him directly rather than relying on me for his account. The investigator looked up briefly. Good. That one word mattered to me. Not because I needed praise. Because precision was the only control I had left. I told her Jenna had once been the remainder beneficiary. Then I explained that I had changed it 6 weeks before the hospitalization. Did Jenna know you changed it? Not from me. Did your mother? Not before the hospital, as far as I know. Why did you make the change? Because Jenna asked me for $30,000, and my mother referred to my trust as if it existed to rescue her. I didn't want my estate plan serving that purpose. Were you afraid of Jenna then? No. I didn't hesitate. I thought she would keep asking me for money. I never thought she'd hurt me. That truth hurt more than any dramatic version could have. The investigator asked about Jenna's business. I showed her only what Jenna had sent me and Owen's photograph. I didn't speculate about crimes or motives. I explained what I could see. $30,000 would not have resolved the obligations. The worksheet showed a much larger amount. The total matched the approximate trust value. When the interview ended, exhaustion settled over me so heavily I could barely lift my phone. It buzzed anyway. Jenna, please tell them you aren't sure. I stared at the message. Another followed. You were medicated. Then, Mom can't survive this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because even now, Mom's pain had been placed in my hands. A fourth message appeared. You're the strong one, Elise. There it was. The title I'd accepted for years as proof I mattered. Strong, reliable, capable. Words that sounded flattering until you noticed they were always spoken right before somebody asked you to carry more. I didn't reply. Instead, I put the phone in the bedside drawer. For the next hour, I did nothing about Jenna. Nothing about Mom. Nothing about Owen. I ate what I could of my dinner. I walked slowly to the window and back with permission from the nurse. I washed my face. When the phone buzzed inside the drawer, I let it. That tiny refusal felt unnatural, which told me how badly I needed it. The next morning, an investigator contacted me again. I was told only what they were able to share. Carol had reported a discrepancy involving a prescription medication she kept at home. It didn't prove who had taken anything. It didn't prove how anything reached my IV. But Jenna lived in Mom's house. That afternoon, Carol called. I answered because I wanted her words from her, not filtered through Owen or a relative. I didn't give Jenna anything, she said before hello. I didn't say you did. The investigators asked about my medication. I know. I didn't even know anything was missing. I stayed quiet. Her breathing became uneven. Then she said, "She lives here. She could have taken anything." My fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't need to infer access. Mom had just described it. I told them the truth, she added. Good. Elise, don't say it like that. Like what? Like you're pleased. I'm not pleased about any of this. You sound so cold. I closed my eyes. There was that word again. Cold. The family translation for a woman who stopped absorbing everybody else's panic. Mom, did you show Jenna the old trust binder? Silence. My heart began pounding. Mom? I was trying to calm her down. That wasn't my question. She was scared. Did you show it to her? Yes. The answer was barely audible. Why? She thought she was going to lose everything. And you thought my remainder designation would help? I thought knowing she wouldn't always be alone might calm her down. Knowing she got my money if I died. That is not how I said it. Owen heard how you said it. Her voice sharpened. So now Owen is against us too? Against who? You know what I mean. No, I don't. Elise, this is getting out of control. It was out of control before I knew about it. You're making your sister sound like some kind of monster. I haven't called her anything. You're giving investigators documents. Documents she sent me. You're saving messages. Messages she sent me. Do you hear yourself? Yes. For the first time, I did. I sounded calm. Specific. Unapologetic. Mom lowered her voice. Your sister is terrified. So am I. She could lose her business. I almost lost my life. That isn't what I meant. But it's what happened. She began crying quietly. The old instinct came instantly. Fix this. Tell her you know she didn't mean it. Say something kind. Promise you'll figure out Jenna's debt later. I gripped the edge of the mattress until the urge passed. Then Mom said, Jenna needs you. I looked at the closed bedside drawer, where my phone had spent the last hour unanswered. No, I said. She needs to face whatever comes next without my money. Elise. No. You're really going to do this? I'm going to stop undoing what everyone else does. Mom ended the call. For a long time afterward, I stared at the wall. I expected guilt to crush me. It came, but it didn't crush me. That was new. Near dusk, I opened the drawer and checked my phone. 7 missed calls. 3 from Mom. 4 from Jenna. There were messages too. The first from Jenna was familiar. Please answer me. The second wasn't. You changed it. I sat straighter. Another arrived before I could touch the screen. You really changed it before the hospital. My mouth went dry. I had never told Jenna directly. I typed nothing. A new bubble appeared. Do you have any idea what you took away from me? Then another. That was my future. For several seconds I only stared. Not your trust. Not Grandma's money. Not something I hoped you'd share. My future. Jenna had taken an asset that belonged to me, that would only have become hers under a specific condition, and mentally spent it while I was still alive. I took screenshots, saved them, added the date and time. Then I opened the folder on my laptop. Source documents do not alter. As I saved the files, something clicked into place that had nothing to do with the investigation. For years, Jenna had never truly asked whether I would rescue her. Mom had never really asked either. They negotiated the amount. They negotiated the timing. They negotiated how guilty I should feel. But underneath all of it sat the same assumption, that if the crisis became serious enough, I would surrender whatever part of myself was required to make it stop. Money, career, time, silence, even grief. The spreadsheet had simply made the assumption visible. They hadn't been asking whether I would save Jenna. They had already budgeted my rescue. By the time the hospital cleared me to go home, I had stopped thinking of discharge as a return to normal. Normal was the problem. Mom arrived before breakfast with a tote bag of clean clothes and the determined expression she wore whenever she had already made a decision for someone else. I brought your gray sweats, she said. The soft ones. Thanks. and I changed the sheets in the guest room. I looked up from the discharge papers. What guest room? At my house. I'm going back to my apartment. Her hand stopped inside the tote. Elise, don't be ridiculous. You shouldn't be alone yet. I can manage. You got dizzy walking to the bathroom yesterday. I've been cleared to go home. That doesn't mean you should be by yourself. She lowered her voice. I'll take care of you. For one dangerous second, I wanted to say yes. Not because going to her house made sense. Because I wanted my mother. I wanted soup appearing without asking. Clean towels. Someone turning on a lamp before sunset. I wanted to pretend the woman offering to care for me was separate from the woman who had shown Jenna my old trust paperwork and told her that if anything happened to me, she'd finally be okay. Then I remembered who else lived under that roof. Jenna is still there. Mom's expression tightened. She'll stay downstairs. No. Elise. She can stay with somebody else. She is already going through enough. I stared at her. So your solution is for me to recover in the same house. You wouldn't have to see her. That isn't the point. Mom folded the gray sweatshirt with more force than necessary. She has already been interviewed. Investigators are asking questions. She barely sleeps. She isn't going to come near you. You can't promise that. I know my own daughter. The sentence landed harder than she intended. So do I. Mom looked away. She could stay with Marlene for a few nights. No. What do you want me to do? There it was again. Her problem becoming my assignment. I don't need you to solve this, I said. I'm going home. To an empty apartment. Yes. She shook her head slowly. You always do this when you're upset. You shut everyone out. No. I usually do the opposite. What does that mean? It means I usually let everyone in until there's nothing left that's mine. She stared at me as if I had spoken another language. A knock interrupted us. Priya stepped into the room carrying my coat. Mom knew her from 2 office holiday dinners and seemed genuinely offended by her presence. You're taking Elise home? Priya glanced at me before answering. Only if that's what she wants. The difference between the 2 women was so small it was almost invisible. One had arrived with a plan. The other had arrived with a question. Yes, I said. That's what I want. Mom's jaw tightened. Fine. She put the folded sweatshirt on the bed. Call me when you realize you need help. I almost said I would. Instead, I said, thank you for bringing my clothes. That was all. Priya carried my bag downstairs without asking what had happened between us. In the car, she kept the radio low. Halfway home? She asked. Do you want me to stay for a while? I considered the question. Can you help me get the groceries upstairs? Sure. And then I think I want quiet. Okay. No wounded silence. No. After everything I'm doing for you? No demand that I reassure her. She carried 2 bags into my kitchen, put milk in the refrigerator, left the rest on the counter, and handed me my keys. Text me if you need anything. I will. She paused. Or don't. You don't owe me a status report. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the center of my apartment. The silence felt different from the hospital. No monitors. No carts. No footsteps stopping outside my door. For years, an empty room had made me think of exclusion. That afternoon, it felt like ownership. I took a shower slowly, sat on the edge of my bed until the dizziness passed, and made toast even though I wasn't hungry. My phone buzzed twice in the kitchen. I didn't get up. That was the first evening in years when I let somebody else's urgency stay on the other side of a wall. 2 days later, I spoke with the trustee by video. He shared the documents on screen. The old designation appeared first. Jenna Harper. Seeing her name there made my stomach tighten even though I already knew what it said. Then he opened the current version. The scholarship fund. Effective, 6 weeks. Before my hospitalization. I leaned closer. Can you leave both dates visible? Of course. Old designation date, change request date, effective date. He adjusted the display. There it was. Not memory. Not interpretation. Sequence. I asked. If I had died while Jenna was still the remainder beneficiary, would she have received the money immediately? No. How long would it take? That would depend on administration and the circumstances. There would be a process. So, She couldn't have walked into a bank the next morning with $160,000. No. I sat back. That mattered. For 2 days, one part of the story had bothered me. Jenna's debt was urgent. The trust was not liquid overnight. If she understood anything about how it worked, then immediate cash couldn't have been the whole expectation. What could she have believed the designation gave her? I asked. The trustee chose his words carefully. I can't speculate about what another person believed. Right. I stopped myself. That was my job, not his. I looked at Owen's photograph afterward. The total needed: $160,000. Warehouse. Refunds. Credit. Personal obligations. Then I looked back at the trust documents. Jenna hadn't necessarily needed money the next morning. She needed something she could point to. An expected source. A reason to tell someone demanding payment, "Give me more time." Maybe she believed she could borrow against the expectation. Maybe she thought creditors would wait. Maybe she was wrong about all of it. The exact financial assumption mattered less than the fact that she had already built a rescue plan around an asset that only became relevant if I wasn't alive to use it. My future was measured in years. A home someday. Retirement. A margin between myself and the kind of panic that had swallowed Jenna. Her future had narrowed to weeks. That contrast explained desperation. It did not excuse what she had done with it. I closed the trust files and opened my work email. A message from Human Resources had been sitting there since the previous day. Leadership position available. The title was familiar. Not exactly the same job I had walked away from 2 years earlier, but close enough that my chest tightened when I read the description. Regional Compliance Oversight. Vendor Disputes. Audit Coordination. Staff Mentoring. Travel. A real step upward. The application deadline was Saturday at 5 in the afternoon. I read it twice. Then my phone lit up with a group message from Mom. Saturday. 6 o'clock. My house. Everyone needs to hear the same thing before this gets worse. Another message followed. If Elise still considers herself part of this family, she'll be there. I stared at the 2 screens. Saturday at 5. Saturday at 6. My hands moved toward the laptop before I consciously decided what to do. Close the application. Prepare for Mom. That was the old sequence. Everyone else's crisis first. My life in whatever space remained. I left the application open. Then I logged into my bank account instead. The recurring payments were easy to find once I stopped pretending they were temporary. Mom's phone line. A utility account I had taken over after Dad died because she was overwhelmed. A monthly transfer I'd started during a tax shortage nearly 3 years earlier. A small insurance-related payment I had told myself I'd revisit when things settled. Things never settled. They simply became normal. I listed each arrangement and checked what could be transferred without putting Mom at immediate risk. I wasn't going to shut off heat or strand her without coverage to prove a point. That wasn't a boundary. That would have been punishment. I gave reasonable transition dates and sent her the instructions. She called less than 5 minutes later. "What is this? You got my email." "Of course I got it. Why are you canceling everything?" "I'm not canceling everything today. You know what I mean. I've given you dates to transfer the accounts." "Why?" "Because they shouldn't still be mine." Her breathing became sharper. "You're punishing me." "No. You're doing this because of Jenna." What happened with Jenna made me look at arrangements I should have looked at years ago. "So you're using this crisis to cut me off." "I am ending payments that were supposed to be temporary." "You agreed to them." "Yes." "Then you can't suddenly pretend I forced you." "I didn't say you forced me." "You're acting like a victim." I closed my eyes. The old Elise would have spent 20 minutes proving Mom wasn't a bad person before asking her to respect the decision anyway. That performance had never worked. "Yes," I said. "I agreed before." Mom went quiet. I continued. "I'm not agreeing anymore." "Elise, listen to yourself." "I am. This isn't how a daughter treats her mother." That sentence used to stop me cold. Now I heard the missing half. This isn't how a daughter treats her mother when the mother has grown used to the daughter's money. "I've sent everything you need to transition the accounts." "So that's it?" "For the bills, yes." She hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone still in my hand. My heart was beating far too quickly for a conversation about utilities. That was when I understood that boundaries weren't difficult because the words were complicated. They were difficult because my body still believed saying no could get me expelled. The call from Aunt Marlene came an hour later. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Elise, your mother is beside herself. I'm sorry she's upset. Are you? Yes. Marlene seemed thrown by the answer. You don't sound like it. I can care that she's upset without changing my decision. A pause. Carol says you're canceling things she depends on. With transition notice. She says you're doing this because you're angry at Jenna. Did Jenna ever borrow money from you? Silence. The subject change wasn't subtle. I intended it that way. How is that relevant? Marlene asked. How much? She said. 8,000. When? About 2 years ago. Did she repay it? Some. How much did Mom tell you Jenna needed at the time? Marlene's voice cooled. She said the business had a temporary cash problem. I opened Owen's photograph on my laptop. I have a dated photograph of a worksheet Mom asked Owen to check. The total was about 160,000. That doesn't make sense. It predates the money Jenna borrowed from you. Marlene said nothing. I didn't fill the silence. You're sure? She asked. I'm looking at the date. Did Carol know? She was the one who asked Owen to check the totals. Another pause. Then, Marlene said quietly, your mother told me not to pressure Jenna because you were handling the bigger debts. I leaned back. There it was. Not proof of anything that happened at the hospital. Something more ordinary. And, in its own way, more revealing. Each of us had been given a separate version. Marlene thought I was covering the rest. I thought the $30,000 request was a new emergency. Owen thought Mom was merely trying to persuade me. Nobody had seen the whole picture, because the whole picture would have made the pattern impossible to excuse. I didn't know, Marlene said. Neither did I. Are you going Saturday? Yes. Your mother thinks you're coming to make some kind of accusation. No. What are you coming to do? I looked at the open files on my laptop. Put the dates in one room. Saturday arrived with a dull headache and 3 messages from Mom before breakfast. Please don't humiliate Jenna. Remember, there are people in this family who still love both of you. Think carefully about what you want after this is over. That last one almost worked. I did think about what I wanted. For years, the answer would have been simple. I wanted Mom to say she understood. I wanted Jenna to apologize. I wanted the 4 of us to sit down at Thanksgiving without anyone measuring what I owed for my place there. But wanting something didn't make it available. At noon, I began building the timeline. 3 pages. The first showed a sample of financial help I had given Jenna over the years. Not every coffee. Not every birthday. Only meaningful rescue payments. Date. Amount. Purpose. The second page showed the trust. Old designation. Change. Request. Effective date. Hospitalization date. The third page was the one Mom would hate most. Not because it contained insults. Because it didn't. Date. Statement. Source. Jenna asking why I wouldn't use the trust. Mom saying, leave it with me. The photograph of the $160,000 worksheet. Owen's direct account of seeing Jenna with the old beneficiary summary. Jenna's messages after the hospital. You changed it. That was my future. At 3:30, I looked at the clock. The timeline wasn't perfect. I could improve the formatting. Add another source column. Check every date again. The old instinct whispered that the family meeting was more urgent. I nearly closed the job application. Instead, I clicked into it. The first question asked me to describe my experience managing complex compliance issues across multiple stakeholders. I started typing, then stopped. My first answer minimized everything. Supported audits. Assisted with disputes. Helped coordinate vendor issues. I deleted it. I had led reviews. I had identified contractual risk before it became financial exposure. I had resolved documentation conflicts between departments that didn't agree on what had been authorized. I had trained younger staff. I had built systems other people now relied on. Why was I still writing about my own work as if somebody might accuse me of bragging? I rewrote the answer. Then the next. And the next. At 3:42, I pressed submit. The confirmation appeared. Application received. That was all. No promotion. No guarantee. No dramatic call from a grateful executive. Just proof that when my future and my family's crisis landed on the same afternoon, I had not automatically moved mine. I printed the 3 pages, slid them into a plain folder. Then I sat for a moment in the quiet. The doctor had cleared me for short walks, so I'd been taking one each evening around the block. I was eating regular meals again. I had started leaving my phone in the kitchen for an hour before bed. Tiny things, almost embarrassingly ordinary. But my entire life had been built around being available. Ordinary unavailability felt revolutionary. At 5:15, Owen texted, "You still going?" "Yes." "Want me to pick you up?" "No, I'll drive myself." "You sure?" "Yes." He sent back one word. "Okay." New argument. I appreciated that more than I wanted to admit. By 5:40, I was in my car. The 3-page timeline lay on the passenger seat. Beside, it was a printed copy of the application confirmation I'd brought almost by accident. One document described the system I'd spent years inside. The other described a door I had nearly closed on myself again. At a red light, Mom's latest message appeared on the dashboard screen. "Please come as my daughter, not as an investigator." I read it once, then turned off message previews. I wasn't an investigator. I wasn't a prosecutor. I wasn't going there to decide Jenna's legal fate. I was a contract compliance manager with a habit of remembering what version existed on the date that mattered. More importantly, I was a woman who had spent too many years explaining why everyone else's emergency deserved priority over her own life. When the light changed, I drove on. Carol's house came into view just before 6. Several cars were already parked outside. Aunt Marlene's, Owen's, Jenna's car was still there too. I parked across the street and rested both hands on the steering wheel. For a moment, the child in me wanted to turn around. Not because I doubted the timeline. Because I knew facts couldn't promise me the ending I'd once wanted. They couldn't make Mom choose me. They couldn't turn Jenna back into the sister I thought I had. They couldn't guarantee I would still have a chair at that table by the end of the night. I looked at the application confirmation, then at the 3 pages beside it. One was proof of where I'd been. The other was proof I had started going somewhere else. I picked up the folder, stepped out of the car, and crossed the street. For once, I wasn't walking into my mother's house to fix an emergency. I was walking in to stop being one of the resources everyone else had already spent. The porch light was already on when I reached Mom's front door. For a second, I stood there with the folder against my ribs and listened to the muffled voices inside. This was the same house where Dad had taught Owen to drive by, making him reverse down the driveway until he stopped clipping the grass. The same kitchen where Jenna had once cried because I got a larger slice of birthday cake and Mom quietly switched our plates. The same dining room where I had signed checks, made phone calls, and solved problems so often that nobody thought to ask whether I wanted the job. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Then I remembered the email confirmation sitting in my car. Application received. At 3:42 that afternoon, I had chosen something for myself before answering a summons from this house. That choice had already happened. Whatever happened inside couldn't take it back. I opened the door. Mom was standing near the fireplace. Jenna sat at one end of the sofa, with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face looked thinner than it had in the hospital hallway. She wore sweatpants and one of Mom's old cardigans. Owen stood near the dining table. Aunt Marlene occupied Dad's old chair. There were 2 other relatives I knew well enough to exchange holidays with, but not well enough to trust with anything private. Nobody had a plate, nobody had a drink. It wasn't a dinner. It was a hearing without rules. Mom looked at the folder in my hand. "You brought paperwork." I did. Her mouth tightened. "I asked you to come as my daughter. I am your daughter." Jenna gave a short laugh from the sofa. Could have fooled me. I took the armchair nearest the front door. Not Dad's chair. Not the center of the room. The chair closest to leaving. Mom noticed. She noticed everything when control was involved. "Before anybody starts," she said, "I want one thing understood. Nobody is saying Jenna didn't make a terrible decision." Jenna looked down. The wording caught me immediately. Terrible decision. Not deliberate act. Not what happened in my hospital room. A terrible decision could be crashing a car after drinking too much or signing a bad lease. Mom continued. But what has happened since then is destroying this entire family. Elise has frozen people out. She's stopped helping with things she's handled for years. She's talking to investigators as if we're strangers. Jenna is terrified. Owen is choosing sides. Marlene is suddenly questioning conversations from years ago. Marlene's eyebrows rose. I asked one question. You know what I mean? Mom said. I almost smiled. That phrase had held half our family together. You know what I mean. It allowed the speaker to skip facts and move directly to agreement. Mom looked at me. We all need to admit we've made choices that brought us here. There it was. Jenna beside my IV. Me ending a phone payment. 2 choices. Same category. I waited until the silence became uncomfortable. Mom finally asked, Are you going to say anything? Yes. Marlene leaned toward me. Elise, before you do, can I ask something? Sure. Do you hate Jenna now? Jenna looked at me for the first time. There were 100 ways I could have answered. I could have said I didn't know. I could have reassured everyone that I still loved her. I could have spent 10 minutes proving I wasn't cruel before saying anything difficult. That was exactly what they expected. Instead, I placed the folder on the coffee table. That isn't what these pages answer. Mom closed her eyes. Elise. What do they answer? Marlene asked. What happened? When it happened? And where the information came from? Jenna shook her head. This is insane. No, I said. It's 3 pages. I opened the folder. The first page contained money. Not every dollar. I had no interest in turning birthday gifts or dinner checks into evidence of exploitation. Only rescues. A rent shortage. A vehicle repair. A vendor deposit. A warehouse payment. Business support. Dates. Amounts. Reasons. Marlene leaned closer. Her finger stopped halfway down. That's the month Jenna borrowed from me. Yes. Jenna looked at her. That was separate. Separate from what? Marlene asked. My business. Marlene tapped the page. Elise paid this the week before you asked me for $8,000. Jenna sat straighter. I didn't know Elise was keeping a ledger. I wasn't, I said. These are transfers from my own banking records. Mom folded her arms. So now helping your sister is something you're going to use against her? No. Then why put it on the table? Because each time Jenna asked someone for money, that person was told it was one isolated emergency. Jenna's jaw tightened. You have no idea what I told people. Correct. I looked at Marlene. So, I'm only using what people tell me directly. Marlene turned toward Mom. You told me not to push Jenna because Elise was handling the bigger debts. Mom's shoulders stiffened. I was trying to keep everybody calm. You told me she had a temporary cash problem. She did. Marlene looked down at the dates. This wasn't temporary. Mom started to answer. I lifted the second page. The trust. Jenna's eyes locked onto it. That reaction was small. Still, I noticed it. The page held 4 lines. Old designation. Change request date. Effective date. Hospitalization date. No commentary. No accusation. Jenna had been the remainder beneficiary. Then she wasn't. The change had taken effect 6 weeks before the hospital. Mom stared at the date. You really did it that early? Yes. You didn't tell me. It wasn't your document. She flinched as if I'd slapped the table. Jenna whispered. You didn't even warn me. I looked at her. Warn you about what? She didn't answer. That silence did more than shouting would have. I turned to the 3rd page. This is why I came. Mom shook her head. No. This is why you came to humiliate us. I slid the page toward the middle of the table. Read it. Owen moved closer but didn't touch it. Marlene did. The format was simple. Date. Statement. Source. Jenna's text asking why I wouldn't use the trust if it was still around $160,000. Mom's answer. Leave it with me. The debt worksheet Owen photographed. The date he saw the old beneficiary summary. The sentence he heard Mom say. If anything ever happens to Elise, at least you'll finally be okay. Then Jenna's messages after the hospital. You changed it. That was my future. Mom stared at the page. You took private messages. They were sent to me. You took things Owen photographed behind Jenna's back. Owen spoke before I could. You asked me to check the totals. Mom turned sharply. And you took a picture, so I could add them separately without touching Jenna's spreadsheet. You could have deleted it. I should have told Elise about it. That wasn't what Mom wanted to hear. So now you're against Jenna too? Owen's face tightened. No. You're sitting here helping Elise build a case against your own sister. Elise asked me what I saw. I'm answering. Mom stepped toward him. Where was all this honesty months ago? Owen looked at me briefly, then back at her. Staying out of things was easier when Elise was always the one paying the price. No one moved. It wasn't a dramatic speech. That made it land harder. Mom opened her mouth, but Marlene interrupted. This worksheet is dated before Jenna borrowed money from me. Yes, Owen said. Marlene looked at Mom. You told me she needed $8,000. At that point, that's what she needed from you. The words escaped before Mom could soften them. Marlene leaned back. From me. Carol's face changed. She heard it too late. Jenna stood. This is ridiculous. Everybody helped everybody. Elise is making it sound like some conspiracy because she likes spreadsheets. I kept my voice level. I'm not calling it a conspiracy. You're acting like I sat around planning your death. I haven't said that. You don't have to. Look at everyone. Her hands shook. For one moment, she looked less like the sister who had stood beside my IV and more like the girl who used to hide behind me when Dad raised his voice. That recognition hurt. It did not change the facts. Jenna pointed at the papers. I barely understood any of that trust stuff anyway. There it was. I looked at her. Then you didn't know who the old remainder beneficiary was. She hesitated. Not really. So you didn't know whether the remainder went to Mom, Owen, or you. Her face reddened. I knew enough. What does that mean? It means I knew there was money. That wasn't my question. She stared at me. The room tightened around the silence. Then she snapped. Of course I knew it went to me, not Mom. That was the whole point. Nobody spoke. Even the refrigerator hum from the kitchen seemed loud. Jenna's expression changed first. Then Mom's. Jenna, she said quietly. Too late. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt something settle into place. That doesn't prove what happened in the hospital, I said. Jenna looked at me as if she'd expected me to claim more. It proves you knew more about my trust than you've been telling everyone. Her breathing became fast. Mom showed me. Marlene turned toward Carol. Mom lifted both hands. I was trying to give her hope. Hope for what? Marlene asked. That she wouldn't lose everything. Marlene's voice dropped. With Elisa's money? That isn't what I said. I leaned forward. You showed her a document that only mattered if I died. I did not tell her to do anything to you. I know. Mom stopped. For the first time that evening, she looked confused rather than defensive. I believe you, I said. Her eyes filled. I don't think you wanted me dead. Ellis. But I think you spent years teaching Jenna that if she needed something badly enough, whatever I had stopped belonging to me. That isn't fair. Then tell me which part is wrong. Mom pressed her lips together. I waited. She looked at the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Nothing came. Jenna sat back down heavily. You have no idea what I was dealing with. I know some of it. No, you don't. Then tell the investigators whatever they ask you. I'm not deciding that here. Her face hardened. So, that's it? You just hand everything over and let them ruin me? No. Your choices don't become mine because I tell the truth about them. You could help with legal costs. Mom said my name sharply. Elise. I looked at her. There it was. Even now. Even after the hospital. The next invoice. I stood. No. Jenna laughed bitterly. Of course. No debt payments. No legal expenses. No business rescue. Mom's expression darkened. You're making decisions while everyone is emotional. I made some of them days ago. I continued before she could interrupt. You won't carry messages between Jenna and me. The recurring payments I've been handling end on the dates I already sent you. I'm not making new family loans. And I'm not participating in any conversation that calls what happened in the hospital a misunderstanding. Jenna stared at me. You really think you can just make rules for everyone now? No. I'm making rules for access to me. Mom wiped beneath one eye. And if we don't accept them? You don't have to accept a boundary for it to exist. Marlene looked down at the papers. Owen said nothing. He didn't need to. This part belonged to me. Mom's voice changed. It became softer. More dangerous because of how familiar it was. You know what your father would say if he could see this. My stomach tightened. I hated that it still worked. He'd tell you family doesn't abandon family. The old version of me appeared instantly. She was exhausted but helpful. Angry, but apologetic. She could leave this room and spend the entire drive home composing a message to make Mom feel safer. I let that version stand beside me for 1 second. Then I let her go. Dad also never saw Jenna standing next to my hospital bed. Mom recoiled. You said yourself you don't know exactly what she did. Correct. So stop saying it like that. No, I know where she was. I know what I saw. I know what I don't know. I'm done shrinking the part I do know, because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. Jenna stood again. Just admit you want me punished. I want you to be responsible for what you did. You don't even know what that was. Then the investigation will determine what it can. I don't need to invent an answer. That silenced her. I picked up the folder. Mom watched me. So you're leaving? Yes. After coming here and putting all of this on the table. Yes. You don't care what happens after you walk out? I paused. There was the trap. If I cared, I should stay. If I left, I must not care. No, I said. I care. I'm leaving anyway. Her face crumpled. Then came the sentence she had probably been holding all evening. If you walk out now, don't expect Thanksgiving to be the same. My hand rested on the doorknob. The room disappeared for half a second. I saw Thanksgiving when Dad was alive. Jenna stealing crispy skin from the turkey before dinner. Owen pretending he didn't like pumpkin pie and eating 2 slices. Mom lighting candles she only used once a year. Me carrying bowls between the kitchen and dining room while everyone else sat down. I wanted that table, or maybe I wanted the version of it I'd spent my life trying to earn. My throat tightened. Nobody behind me spoke. I could have turned around. I could have softened something. Just enough to leave the door open. Instead, I looked at Mom. It hasn't been the same for me for years. Then, I walked outside. Cold air hit my face. My hands were shaking when I reached the car. I sat behind the wheel without starting it. For a while, grief and relief were impossible to separate. Then my phone lit up. Not Mom. Work. An automated email. Thank you for your application. Your submission has been received and is under review. I read it twice. A tiny, ordinary message from a life that existed beyond the house in front of me. No one at work knew I had spent the evening dismantling the role I'd carried since my 20s. They didn't need to. I had submitted because I was qualified. I had gone to the meeting because I chose to. And now I was leaving because staying would only turn my boundaries into another negotiation. I started the car. 2 days passed, without a direct call from Mom. I took my evening walk. Made dinner. Reviewed a few work documents for my return without reopening Jenna's financial files. For one entire night, I left my phone in the kitchen and read a book in bed. On the second afternoon, Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. The notification sat on my screen for nearly an hour before I listened. Her voice sounded exhausted. Jenna's business is shutting down. A pause. Then the familiar pressure entered her tone. She says this is because of you. I looked around my apartment. At the shoes beside the door from my walk. At the job application confirmation pinned under a magnet on the refrigerator. At the stack of trust documents I had deliberately put away instead of rereading. For years, that sentence would have sent me straight into action. Call Jenna. Call a vendor. Ask how much. Figure out what could still be saved. This time, I deleted nothing. Changed nothing. Fixed nothing. I put the phone back on the counter. And I did not call her back. The business did shut down. Not that week, and not because I made a phone call. For years, every crisis involving Jenna had been presented to me as if there were a single red button somewhere that only I could press. Pay this invoice, and the warehouse survives. Cover this deposit and the employees keep their jobs. Give her $30,000 and everything stabilizes. Once I stopped pressing the button, I learned something almost embarrassingly simple. There had never been one button. There had been a failing business held together by borrowed time, borrowed money, and people who had never been shown the same set of numbers. Mom left 2 more voicemails after the one blaming me. The first asked me to reconsider helping with just the immediate obligations. The second was angrier. Elise, you made your point. Nobody is asking you to save the entire company. There are people who are going to lose money because you're refusing to help. I listened to it while standing in my kitchen with a bowl of soup warming between my hands. A year earlier, that sentence would have activated every part of me. Who? How much? What deadline? I would have opened a spreadsheet before the soup cooled. That night, I ate. The next morning, Jenna sent one message. The warehouse is closing. I didn't answer. An hour later, I hope you're happy. That one almost pulled me in. Not because I was happy. Because I wanted to prove I wasn't. I wanted to write that I had never wanted her business destroyed. That I had helped more times than she remembered. That none of this was what I wanted. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I realized what answering would do. It would put me back on trial. Not for standing beside an IV. Not for hiding the size of her debt. For failing to prevent the consequences. So I locked the phone and went to work. Returning to the office felt strange at first. People asked how I was feeling without asking what had happened. My supervisor didn't press for details. Priya left a coffee on my desk the first morning and said, "Decaf. Don't make that face." What face? The one where you're about to tell me you can buy your own coffee. I can. I know. She walked away before I could make gratitude into debt. That became one of the small things I started noticing. At home, every favor had eventually joined an invisible ledger of loyalty. Outside it, people sometimes did kind things and expected nothing except basic decency. I had forgotten that was possible. The leadership application moved forward slowly. First came an email confirming that I met the minimum qualifications. Then an interview panel was scheduled. Nothing about it felt cinematic. That was part of why it mattered. Nobody pulled me aside and said the company had finally discovered my hidden brilliance. No executive heard about the hospital and decided I deserved a reward. I prepared because the role was competitive. For 3 evenings, I reviewed projects I had led and wrote down results I would normally have dismissed as team efforts without explaining my own contribution. During the interview, one manager asked, "Tell us about a time different stakeholders wanted conflicting outcomes." For half a second, Mom's living room flashed through my mind. 3 pages. Dates. Claims. Sources. I almost laughed. Instead, I described a vendor dispute from work. When people disagree about what happened, I said, I separate what they prefer from what the record supports. Then I make sure the process can survive being questioned later. The interviewer nodded and wrote something down. When I walked out, there was no certainty. But there was something better than the old feeling of having abandoned an opportunity before anyone could tell me no. I had stayed in the room. Meanwhile, Jenna's world kept getting smaller. I learned the details only in pieces that came directly to me. Owen told me the warehouse lease ended after the business could no longer meet its obligations. Later, Jenna herself mentioned in a message that equipment had been sold. I never contacted a vendor, never called a client, never posted a word about her online. There was no revenge campaign. The company simply lost the person who had spent years making sure every shortfall had somewhere else to land. Mom still let Jenna live with her. That mattered to me. I did not want my sister homeless. I did not want her starving. I did not want suffering for the pleasure of watching her suffer. Carol bought groceries. Jenna stayed in the guest room. The business owner image disappeared, but she had a roof. The difference was that Mom could not replace what I had been. She could provide a bedroom. She could not provide another $160,000. Neither could Aunt Marlene. When Jenna asked Marlene for more time on the money she'd borrowed, Marlene later told me she had answered, "I'm done pretending I don't need to be repaid because someone else will eventually cover you." She didn't say it proudly. Neither of us celebrated. We were just beginning to understand how many people had been holding one corner of the same collapsing structure. Months passed before the hospital case changed in any official way. That pace frustrated Mom. It frightened Jenna. For me, it became an exercise in doing less. Investigators contacted me when they needed clarification. I responded. When I was given access to information related to my own case, I read it. When I didn't know something, I let myself not know it. That last part might have been the hardest. The old Elise believed uncertainty was an emergency. She filled gaps, made calls, solved. Now I had to let trained professionals handle the parts that belonged to them without turning their work into another responsibility I could absorb. One afternoon, I received notice that the matter had moved beyond investigation into formal criminal proceedings. I read the document at my desk after closing my office door. My hands shook. Not satisfaction, not triumph, grief, mostly. There was something devastating about seeing Jenna's name in a formal case connected to the night I nearly died. For several minutes, she wasn't the woman from the hospital. She was 12 years old, following me through the mall because Mom had told me not to lose her. She was 17, calling me because she was afraid to tell Dad she'd dented the car. She was 24, crying into my shoulder after her first serious breakup. All of those versions of her were real. So was the woman beside my IV. I had spent too much of my life believing one truth had to erase another. It didn't. Later, after the case had moved through its process, I was informed that Jenna had accepted serious legal responsibility for what happened. The consequences were determined by the court, not by me. I didn't ask anyone to increase them. I didn't ask anyone to reduce them. When Mom called afterward, her voice was quiet. You could have helped her. I leaned against my kitchen counter. With the case? With everything before it got this far. There it was. Still. Months of evidence, business collapse, formal proceedings, and somehow we had arrived back at the same conclusion. If I had given enough soon enough, nothing bad would have happened. Mom, I could have given Jenna $30,000. You could have done more than that. Yes. She went silent. I continued. I could have given her the entire trust. I could have emptied my savings. I could have taken a loan. And if the business still failed, you would have asked what else I could do. That isn't fair. It happened for years. She was desperate. I know. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Yes. My voice softened. It means she was desperate. I waited. It doesn't mean I caused what she chose. Mom cried. This time I didn't feel strong for staying calm. I felt sad. There was a difference. We ended the call without fixing anything. Weeks later, Owen asked me to lunch. We met at a small place near my office. He arrived early and had already ordered iced tea for himself, not for me. That detail made me smile. What? He asked. You didn't order for me. I've been trying not to assume things. Good start. He looked down at the menu. Then he said, I've been thinking about what I told you in the hospital. Which part? That I didn't want to get in the middle. I waited. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the menu. I made it sound like neutrality. It wasn't. I know. He looked up. I spent years calling myself neutral because coward sounded worse. There was no performance in it. No request that I contradict him. So I didn't. I need consistency more than guilt. He nodded. Okay. That was the beginning of our relationship changing. Not an embrace. Not a promise. Lunch. Then another lunch weeks later. A text about a movie he thought I'd like. A birthday card without a message from Mom folded inside it. When Carol asked him to tell me Jenna needed money for another expense, he didn't pass the request along. I learned that only because Mom complained to me directly. That was how Owen started earning trust. Quietly. The same way he'd once lost it. My own life also began changing in ways that had nothing to do with Jenna. The leadership offer arrived on a Tuesday morning. I read the email once. Then again. The salary was better. The responsibility was larger. There would be travel and staff development work. 2 years earlier, I would have called Mom before accepting. Not because she had any authority over my career. Because I would have checked whether my growth inconvenienced anyone. This time, I reviewed the terms, asked 2 questions, and accepted. Priya leaned over the wall between our offices after the announcement. So, boss lady, don't start. You'll have people reporting to you. That doesn't make me royalty. It does mean you have to let someone else carry things occasionally. I narrowed my eyes. Was that workplace advice or personal criticism? Yes. I laughed. It felt good. Recovery happened the same way. Not all at once. Some nights I woke with my heart pounding because a sound from the television reminded me of a monitor. For a while, I hated anyone standing behind me when I was seated. My doctor cleared me for more activity, and I began walking farther. First around the block, then 2 blocks, then a trail near the river on Saturday mornings. I kept one evening each week free of family communication. At first, that felt punitive. Then it became ordinary. Wednesday was mine. I read, cooked, sometimes did absolutely nothing. Nobody collapsed because I was unavailable for 3 hours. That discovery was almost insulting. For years, I had believed my constant availability was holding everyone together. The world kept turning when I went for a walk. My bank balance changed too. Without recurring rescues and emergency transfers, money began staying where I put it. The first month with a noticeable surplus, my immediate thought was, who needs this? I actually opened my contacts, then stopped. What do I want it to build? The question felt selfish. I asked it anyway. About a year after the hospital, I stood inside a modest condo with afternoon light falling across hardwood floors. Nothing about it screamed success. The kitchen wasn't enormous. The balcony overlooked other buildings rather than a lake. The second bedroom was small. I loved it. The down payment came from savings, money that had stopped leaking into other people's crises, and a legitimate distribution from the trust as part of the financial plan I'd built for myself. I did not empty the trust. The scholarship remainder stayed exactly where I had placed it. After closing, I walked through the condo alone. When I reached the second bedroom, an old thought rose automatically. Jenna could stay here, if she ever needed somewhere to go. I stood in the doorway. Then I laughed. Not cruelly. Almost affectionately toward the woman I had been. She really had believed every empty space in her life was supposed to be kept available for someone else's emergency. A week later, I bought a desk, then bookshelves, then a reading chair that cost more than I normally spent on furniture. I stood in the store for 10 minutes trying to convince myself it was unnecessary. Then another thought came. Necessary to whom? I bought it. The first Thanksgiving in the condo arrived cold and bright. Mom did not invite me to her house. By then, I had expected it. Expecting something did not make it painless. That morning, I made coffee and cried at my kitchen counter. I missed Dad. I missed the smell of Mom's stuffing. I even missed Jenna stealing food before dinner and pretending she hadn't. Most of all, I missed a version of us that perhaps had never existed as cleanly as I remembered it. Part of me still wanted Carol to call and say the sentence I had spent most of my adulthood trying to earn. I should have protected you too. She didn't. Around 4, Priya arrived carrying dessert. You said don't bring anything, she said. So naturally I brought pie. Owen came later with a bag of groceries and no hidden agenda. My neighbor knocked with another pie because apparently Thanksgiving in my building operated entirely through pastry. By 6, there were more desserts than people. Nobody called us chosen family. The phrase would have embarrassed all of us. We simply ate. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed beside my plate. Mom. My body reacted before my mind did. A little tightening in the stomach. A familiar mental checklist. Who needs money? What happened? What am I supposed to fix? Then the questions faded. The phone kept ringing. Nobody at the table stared. Nobody told me what I owed the caller. Priya glanced over only when the screen went dark. Do you need to get that? I looked toward the entryway. My new key sat in a ceramic bowl I'd bought because I liked it, not because it was practical. Past the hallway was the little room with my desk, my books, and the chair I'd once nearly talked myself out of. My work laptop was closed. Tomorrow's schedule contained no emergency I hadn't chosen. I turned the phone face down. Not right now. Then I picked up my fork. For most of my life, I thought being the eldest daughter meant proving how much I could carry. Money, fear, guilt, other people's mistakes. I thought strength meant never being the person who needed accommodation. I was wrong. Strength was learning that love did not require permanent access, that compassion did not require payment, that another person's desperation could be real without becoming my obligation. I still loved Mom. Some part of me would probably always love Jenna. What changed was that love no longer came with automatic authorization to spend me. The phone remained face down while conversation moved on around the table, and for the first time, I understood that I hadn't abandoned my family. I had stopped abandoning myself.